Hello, I'm Guy, and this is GuyRobot. Hello! Well, there was certainly a strong response to the last video I put online about Linux and Windows. As you may or may not have seen, I did a video on how I thought Windows was superior to Linux in many ways. Now, I did put a whole bunch of caveats in this trying to point out that actually I think it very much depends on a workflow and what you're particularly doing, and that the whole point was that Windows isn't as rubbish as it used to be, and that you can have a very productive and good development and open source environment on Windows these days. But there is no doubt that many people disagreed with me on that front, and it was heresy. One thing, however, I did mention in that video is that I was in the process of currently moving away from being tied to Windows within the development stack that I'm currently working on. So I'm still working on a Microsoft development stack in terms of its .NET, but we've moved to .NET Core, and that means we can run everything on Linux. So, for the last month or so, I've been in the process of moving away from Windows and into Linux. That has involved updates to numerous VMs in several environments, completely new infrastructure, and of course my development machines, both my desktop and my laptop. And what did I choose to go to? Well, Arch Linux for everything. Overall, I wanted to go with a rolling release distribution. Now, those who watched my channel in the past would have seen that I used to use Gentoo Linux for quite a period of time. Why did I not go back to that? Well, I wanted to have parity between the development machines and the environments that I'm working on servers as much as possible. So I am using Docker for almost everything. However, I like to have the same familiarity and experience managing a particular distribution. I find that I can get more detail and more experience with it than I can having 3 or 4 different distributions that I'm managing at any point in time. And if I start looking at in terms of what I want to run for production, well, a source-based distribution just doesn't cut it. Not least because sometimes I want VMs that only have 1 CPU core, or a shared 0.75 of a CPU core for a fairly low powered one. And going and compiling software takes an age. System updates take forever, and it just doesn't become practical. In fact, even on my machine, which has got 28 full cores, so 56 threads with hyperthreading enabled, it's still painful to go and do big recompiles when you've got a whole bunch of different applications that need to have packages updated at the same times. And I've got 40 gig of RAM. Now, if you've got a whole bunch of C++ compiling going on at a time, I've actually got to the point with Gentoo where I would page out my entire disk of memory and the system would grind to a halt during package upgrades. Now, the solution is that I'll have fewer CPU cores that I'm compiling with to reduce the memory burden, or reduce the VMs I'm running, or do a whole bunch of stuff, but I don't want to make those compromises. I want to be using all of my CPU cores to compile if I'm doing a source-based distribution. So, although I did enjoy Gentoo, I didn't feel it was right for what I'm looking for moving forward. And you know what, I've never used Arch on a day-to-day basis before. I've played around with it, but I've never used it as my main distro. And I thought, well, maybe the time's come. So, I have moved over to Arch Linux on my desktop. And I've got the whole of the Windows development stack there that I would have been used to in terms of I've got Microsoft .NET Core, I've got Docker, I've even got SQL Server for Linux. And it's great being able to have the development flow now on Linux and no longer being tied to Windows for it. So I've come up with a series of videos looking at how I did various things on it. Some are quite quick, some of them are a bit longer. This first one is just a full end-to-end getting Arch Linux up and running. So this one in particular is filmed inside a virtual machine just to give us a better ability to capture and zoom in because I don't have a capture card for it. However, these steps were repeated numerous times and it is the exact set of steps I've used on my desktop and my laptop. The only place you're going to have a difference with these steps is based on what graphics card you've got. So whether you've got NVIDIA or whether you've got an AMD one or whether you're using built-in Intel graphics. So I'm going to run through the step-by-step of how to get this installed in a second, but we've also got coming up as part of this series how to get the Microsoft development tools installed. So that includes Visual Studio Code, it includes the Microsoft .NET SDK, and how to get that all up and running on Arch Linux. I've got a separate video running through quickly how to get Microsoft SQL Server installed and running on Linux. And then finally, I run through a video on how to actually get Arch Linux into Microsoft Azure Cloud, as there is no Arch Linux template by default. So I go through creating the entire image optimized for running it in an Azure Cloud environment, how to upload that and spin up your first VMs from it. I've now been running Arch for a month or so, and it's been going really well. But Let's get going and let's see how to get Arch installed on your desktop and get it up and running. Welcome to the Arch Linux installer, not the prettiest in the world. Before we get started, I will just say that this is the UEFI installation, and I'm going to assume that that's what we're doing for the whole of this. All I've done is put this onto a memory stick or a CD, whatever you want, and boot it off it, and you get given this menu. Now, the first thing we need to do is select the first menu option from it and just hit enter and let it boot us into a command prompt. For those who are used to something like Ubuntu that's a lot prettier, then this might be taking you a bit of getting used to. If you're used to the Gentoo video I did, you'll be familiar with this. Basically, we don't have a pretty installer, no menus, nothing. We're going to get our whole system up and running just through commands. Great way to get to know the system you're working with. First thing we need to do is set a UK key map. Obviously, if you're in the States, you don't, but for me, that should not be an @ that should be a double quote. So we do load keys, and then in my case, I want a UK key map. Say you're in Germany, you'd put DE instead there, Spain, ES. And now, ta-da, I have a double quote. The next thing we want to do is turn on NTP. That synchronizes the time with this machine with the internet to make sure that we don't get any weird issues when we're synchronizing packages. So, time date control, set NTP true. Next up, we need to know where we're installing it. So ls block will show us all of our disks that we've got installed. This one's easy. I can see there's one 100 gig disk called VDA, and that's where I'm installing it. If you're not sure, say you've got a couple of disks and they're both the same size, but different manufacturers, you could clarify with dmessage through grep VDA, and you get more information printed about it. For example, if you had VDA and VDB, you could do dmessage through grep VDA, and it might say Samsung, and the other one might say Western Digital if they're different manufacturers. If you have two absolutely identical disks and it's important you don't erase the wrong one, then just unplug the disk for the install and make sure you know what you're doing before you carry on. In our case, we're using VDA. So what we want to do is create a completely new partition for it, whole new partition table actually. So parted dev VDA. We're going to use GPT for our partition table type. So we're going to do mklabel GPT, and we're going to have two partitions. The first is a data partition, and the second is the EFI boot partition. The EFI boot partition is going to be 1 gig in this instance. It can be slightly less, but it certainly doesn't hurt, particularly with the availability of storage these days, to give a bit more space in case you ever are playing around and you want a bit more space for multiple kernels on there. So we're going to create our first partition, and we're going to make it ext4 for our Linux partition, start it at the beginning of the disk and end it. In our case, I'm going to do 99%. You could use exact gigabytes to get it where you wanted to. Since this is a 100 gig disk, it's nice and easy. And then likewise, I'm going to do mkpart2. This one's FAT32, starts at 99%, finishes at 100%. And then I'm going to turn that partition to be marked as an EFI boot partition. Job done, Control and D to exit parted. Next up, I want to format these two drives. So we're going to do mkfs ext4 on dev VDA1 and mkfs fat as type 32 on dev VDA2. And we now need to mount those. So we're going to mount our VDA1 into /mnt. Then we're going to actually create our mount boot folder where we're going to mount, you guessed it, dev VDA2. These aren't permanent, these are just for the installer for now. We'll make these permanent mounts at a later date. Next up, swap. So swap is virtual memory. Ideally, you want to have about the same amount that you do real RAM. So let's assume you've got 8 gig for the sake of this install. You could use dedicated disk for it, or you could put it on a different drive if you, for example, are installing on a hard disk but have a small SSD you wanted to use for swap. In this case, the whole lot's on SSD, so I'm just going to create it as a file in the root. So first we create an empty file. So fallocate-l8g in /mnt/swap file. I'm then going to chmod it to 600. That means nobody other than root can read or write it, which is very important from security, as this could have anything that's in RAM, including passwords or sensitive information. Then we need to create a swap file from it, and we need to turn it on. This will only turn it on for the duration of the install. Again, we'll make that permanent later on. Next up, we want to check the internet connection's working. An easy way to do that is just curl http google.com. If we get something back, and no errors, it means that the internet connection is all set up and working, which we're going to need in a second when we download packages. So what we're going to do here is run a command called packstrap that pulls down a whole bunch of things and puts it into the partition for us. So we're going to use this for the base install of Arch Linux. So we can do packstrap /mnt base. You could put other things on the end here rather than just base, but we're going to just go with the core for now and worry about other stuff later on. Hit enter, that will all start synchronizing package databases and pulling it down. This may take some time depending on your internet connection. I've got an average internet connection and it's going to take me 15 minutes or so. So we're going to jump cut to the end of this bit. Okay, so once packstrap has finished installing, the next thing we need to do is get the system up and ready for us to reboot off its own disk, rather than us being booted off the boot CD or USB stick. So the first thing we need to do is generate the fs tab file, which specifies which partitions we are going to mount every other reboot that we have. So we manually mount them now, we need to make sure they mount every single time. So there's a helpful command, genfs tab. -u means we're going to use UIDs rather than the VDA name for a drive. That means that if you move them around or plug them in differently or they get renamed for any reason, they'll still mount them correctly. We're going to use the /mnt as the root we've got, and we're going to put that into /etc mnt etc fs tab. And then we just want to give that a quick check, so we can cat /mnt etc fs tab, and we can see in there that we've got both our swap, our root, and also our /boot. So everything looks good in there to us. The next thing we want to do is actually go into that /mnt. So at the moment we're still in effect the boot CD, as it were. What we're now going to do is enter our installed version of Arch. So to do that we do arch-root, and we're going to then do /mnt. And now we are in our installed system. This is as if we'd just booted it fresh. Next thing we want to do is set our time zone up. So to do that, I'm going to create a link between I'm in the UK, so the Europe-London time zone, and put that in etc/local time. Then I'm going to specify the hardware clock should be based and set off the current NTP sync time, just to make sure that everything is set correctly. And I'm also going to do a couple of other things here for localization and country. So we're going to set up which locales we're using. So I'm going to edit the locale.gen file. And I am ENGB, so I'm going to do Control W for search, and I'm going to search for EN_GB. And I'm going to uncomment the UTF-8 version of ENGB. Obviously, if you're in a different country, like say you're in German Luxembourg at the top of the screen, you'd have DELU. And I'm actually also going to include EN_US UTF-8, because some applications I've got require that, and it doesn't hurt to have it. Control X to exit, Y to save, Enter to confirm the file name, and then we're going to do locale gen to regenerate those systems, those locales for us on our system. And we've still got that key map from earlier, where we've got UK key map, but we want that to persist through reboots as well. So we're going to put in a file etcvconsole.conf, and we are going to put in there key map equals UK to make sure that comes on every single time. Now let's assume that you're happy with DHCP. We want to turn on DHCP every reboot now, so we're going to do systemctl enable dhcpcd.service. That will mean that every time the system boots, it will get an IP address automatically from the network. If you want to do anything manual here in terms of setting up host name or setting up static IP addresses, that's all documented on the Arch wiki, but for now we're just going to go with DHCP. And next up, we're going to set a password for our root account. This should be our super duper secure password that we very rarely need to use, but we're going to use it while we're carrying on setting up. So we're going to do that now. We're going to give ourselves a host name. So we're going to call this one guytest. Put that into /etc/hostname. And we're going to edit etc hosts. And we're going to just set this up as a default system. So localhost. So again, if you've got static IP, you can do something different here. If you're not doing static IP, follow this where you've got the 2 local host entries and then 127.0.1.1 and your host name for the system. We're almost ready to reboot and see if it works. The one thing we haven't done yet is actually set up our EFI to be able to boot. You could use grub here. There's a number of different things you can do. Because I'm not booting multiple operating systems and I'm just going to keep it super simple, I'm going to use something called EFI Boot Manager. Grub is an option and is also well documented, but we're going to go with EFI Boot Manager. So first thing we're going to do is install EFI Boot Manager. Now we're going to install this as a Arch Linux package, and we do that with pacman -S and then the name of the package, in this case EFI Boot Manager, and press enter. That will ask us to confirm we want to do the install, and then it will go and download it and install it for us. Job done. And so that is the first package we've installed ourselves on Arch. Now I need to configure this EFI Boot Manager so that we're able to boot from it. So we do that with EFI Boot Manager onto dev VDA. Our EFI partition is 2. We're going to create a new label called Arch Linux. The loader for it is /vmliners-linux. It's Unicode. Our root is going to be dev VDA 1 read write, and the initial RAM disk is going to be initramfs-linux.img. And we'll do verbose to confirm what we're doing. So reading through that again, we're telling EFI Boot Manager that it's going to use the VDA disk partition 2, create a new entry for Arch Linux that's going to load the VMliners Linux kernel in Unicode mode, and the root options we're passing to that are the root is dev VDA1, mount read write, and that is our initial RAM disk. So hopefully that should work well. Press enter. Confirm it all looks okay with an EFI Boot Manager --verbose. And we can now see we've got our Arch Linux one at the bottom there. And then we're going to set that one to be default with EFI Boot Manager --boot order. And you see at the bottom it's got boot 000A. So A is our boot order for this. And we'll do verbose again. And now that should be our default system. If we go back to verbose, we can see at the top the third line down says boot order 000A. So we should be good to do a reboot. So we're going to press Ctrl D. And then we are going to do a reboot. And there we have it. We are straight back into our Arch system, and that booted super quick. So we just now need to log in with the root account that we just created. And now we can add a non-root account. So we're going to, in my case, I'm going to add guytp. I'm going to change the password for guytp. And you can see the key map is a UK one as we'd expect it to be. And if we look at the mount list, you can see that we've got everything mounted that we'd expect it to be done. So we've got dev VDA1 on /, and we've got dev VDA2 on boot. Oh, a couple of things I missed for creating that home user. I need to actually create the home directory for guytp and change that to be guytp.guytp for owning it. There are template commands you can do to do all that. I just like doing it step by step so you know what you're doing. And the next thing we need to do is install all the other packages that we want for our core system. So we're going to do pacman-s again. Only install things we actually need rather than optionals, and we're going to install enough things for a full XFC for desktop environment. So I've also got a few things for development here. So Xorg is the core, desktop interface, XFC4. XFC4 goodies are the window manager for that. GDM is a graphical login manager, which I'm not going to use immediately, but might use it a bit. Firefox, obviously, web browser. OpenSSH lets me SSH and manage into this machine. Sudo lets me use my guytp account to run root commands easily. Git is for downloading source code and is also really important in the world of Arch for AUR packages. Those are packages that are made by third parties rather than that come with the system. Docker is something I use for development. Base Devil, again, I'm going to have that. Always a good idea, particularly if you've got source packages you're going to be installing later. NPM, Node.js, and Yarn are just a few other dev things that I'm going to have on my system. So we're going to press enter. So in this case, unlike when we did a package earlier, there's a bunch of optional things we can have. So we can choose which individual components of XOR we want. We're going to have all of them because why not? So we're just going to press enter to take them all. And likewise for XFCE4, we can choose what we want. We're going to keep all of the options for that. And the same in goodies. Similar when we've got for Base Devil. Now, when we come to libgl, we actually have to make a choice here. Do we want to use the NVIDIA 340XX utils, or do we want to use the generic libgl for NVIDIA? Now, in this case, we're going to use libgl NV. Certain graphics cards, you might want to choose 2. So sometimes, rather than giving you, the ones we just looked at were groups of packages. That's where there were several things, and we could choose what we wanted to install. Other things, we need to make a choice of what underlying component we're going to have. Again, we've got the same here with TrueType fonts. We can choose what we want for our TrueType font package. I'm going to go with Noto fonts for now. Later on, I'm going to install Windows fonts that I've got anyway. Now that's going to install a lot of stuff. It's going to take 400 meg to download and it's going to be best part 2 gig installed. So we're going to press yes. That's going to start downloading it, and then that's going to be another 10 minutes or so. So we're going to do another jump cut until it's finished downloading all of those packages. And there we are, everything's now installed. So we have a couple of things left to do. First of all, let's set up some settings for our key map for X. So local control, set X11 key map, GB PC105 extended, and we terminate with Control Alt backspace. Don't need to worry about that if you're on a US one. What you want there, you're going to need to Google for if you're not UK and say leave it if you're US. Oh, we got a typo on that one, so extended with a D. Now that's set up, the next thing I want to do is make it so that my user guytp is able to use sudo. So first of all, we want to add guytp to the wheel group. So we modify the user account by appending the group wheel to guytp. Then we edit the sudo file. And if we go near the bottom of it, there is uncomment to allow members of the wheel to execute any command without a password, which is what I'm going to have on for my local system. If it was in production or something other than a workstation, I'd have the one above where I had to enter a password. So just remove the hash from it with delete, then press escape : to get to entering this bit at the bottom, and then WQ enter. That will save your file. Now I'm going to enable any services I want. So system control enable SSHD, system control enable Docker, system control. We already enabled DHCPD, but if you forgot earlier on for some reason, you could do enable DHCPD here as well. If you have gone for wired networking or any networking where you're not using DHCPD, then you would do disable DHCPCD there, and you could do enable systemd-networkd instead. If you wanted to go for GDM to have a graphical login screen, then you could do systemctl enable GDM there. And we should be almost done. One of the last things we want to do is log in as my user guytp. So that lets us su, then dash, then the username lets us log in as a user as if we'd done a full login, but without needing their password as root. And we're just going to edit our xinit.rc file. As I said, I'm not planning on using GDM, so I'm going to have my xinit.rc, and I'm going to in here set my x keyboard map to GP, and I'm going to do start xfce4 in here. Control X, yes to save it, and I'm going to press Control D twice, once to log back out as guytp, once again to log back out to the main screen. And at this point, the system's ready to go. So actually, if I log back in, what we'll do is do a reboot. And then we should be good to log into our system. So this time we're going to log in as our user account. And now we should just need to do start X, and that will start our X Windows interface, in this case with XFCE4. Ta-da! And there we have it. So I'll start with a default config. And then at this point, you can then set up your system however you want it to be. Now, this has used the frame buffer for the graphics card. If you've got an NVIDIA or an AMD card, then you're going to want to go and set those up separately. And again, there are pages for that on the wiki. I've just kept this simple and used the default with frame buffer for now, so that this is more relevant to everyone. However, if you do have anything other than a virtual machine and you've got a proper graphics card, you are definitely going to want to go and do that to get a massive increase in your performance. And that's it. We've got Arch Linux installed. You could use any other window manager you want. I personally like XFCE4. I am going to be doing something on tiling window managers soon, but for now I find this is the most lightweight one I've got. When you're done with XFCE4, you can just do logout to drop back down to the console. If you want a sudo or something, you can do sudo-i to enter the command prompt as root. And if you want to see what GDM looks like, you could do system control enable GDM. And then if we reboot again, you should this time reboot into the graphical interface. And there you have it. Now you've got GDM, so this time you can log in with a graphical interface if you prefer. And that time we've logged it in to GNOME instead, so we can log out of there. Oh, actually you can see we have a very empty GNOME install at the moment, but if you want to, we've got GNOME on there as well. We'll log out. And if you want to go into XFCE on here, the first time you need to select your default login, so press that, and then we go to XFCE session. And we're back where we were before. There we go. And that was it. Super easy, right? Not exactly the most difficult of installs compared to something like Gentoo. I do like the fact though that I still have a degree of control about it. I can choose what I put on there and I'm not guided through a horrible menu. I also like the fact that it forces me to learn how to use the system a little bit from the installation onwards. Overall, I've been really happy with the move to Arch Linux and I've got no desire to switch back to either Gentoo or Windows at the moment. I found it really easy to manage on a day-to-day basis. I've spent more of my time being productive than I have managing my distribution, and I've spent more of my time being productive than I have dealing with stuff in Windows. And most importantly of all, it works really well for my development flows, which is one of the things. I don't like Visual Studio Code as much as full Visual Studio, but we'll cover that in another video later. Overall, wouldn't switch back. Now, what I am planning on doing is starting to use a tiling window manager in the future. I'm still using XFWM for now. That's in the short term. What I need to do is actually have the time to properly try out and customize a couple of tiling WMs. And then once I've done that, I can see how it works on my day-to-day basis. So expect in the next probably 2 months, a video of me when I've decided which window manager I'm using, how I've got it set up, and kind of going to go from that point forward. But for now, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any thoughts of specific things that interest you around this that you'd like to see, do let me know. And the next video that'll be coming up will be about getting Visual Studio Code and .NET Core up and running on Arch Linux. And I'll see you then. Thanks.